mic here to get us started, and then I'll welcome you from, yes, perfect. All right. Good morning, and welcome to Adult Education here at Westminster Presbyterian Church. We are delighted to be together this morning in person and online. As you know, we've been going through a series in our adult education program called The Ties That Bind. It's a series about family in the Christian tradition, family as a metaphor for church. What are the opportunities and also some of the downsides of speaking of church as family? What has the church had to say about family over the years? What is it saying about family today? And what's our own theology about this? So I am so excited for this series. I really, really enjoyed it. When Matt Skinner and I were talking this over, we started with an intro class where we talked about metaphors for family that we see in the scriptures. Then Matt and Tim talked about fatherhood in the Christian tradition, and we got a great question during that class, which was, are we going to talk about motherhood, right? What's all this talk of fathers? Will we talk about motherhood? And Matt said, yes, we are. And in fact, Dr. Amy Marga is going to come, and now here she is today to talk to us about mothering in the Christian tradition. So Dr. Marga is a professor of systematic theology at Luther Seminary, and her most recent book is actually called In Her Image: Recovering Motherhood in the Christian Tradition. So Dr. Marga, I know this is something that you have thought about and written about a great deal. One of the things that I love about your research and your intellectual interests are you do this cutting edge resource with these really traditional sources. So she's written about white mothers and black mothers in the Bible. She's written about the redeeming act of giving birth, Martin Luther's theology concerning the bodies of mothers, and children in the theologies of Martin Luther and Karl Barth. And Dr. Marga is an expert on Karl Barth. That's another major research area for her. So last time that she was here, afterwards, you guys gave us some feedback. You said to me and Matt, you said, we want you to know that we love you and you're doing a great job. But Dr. Marga is amazing. Invite her back. So here she is to lead us through an exploration of mothering in the Christian tradition. So thank you, and a warm welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I love you too. I love you guys too, by the way. Thank you very much. I was just telling Margaret that those of you who were here last time, this presentation might be a little bit different, and some of you might feel a little bit depressed after what I have to say. But we're going to just kind of work through it together. And there's just sort of one thing I want to put on the board. Can I move with the Zoomers? Yes, let's Zoomers. One thing I want to just put on the board. I won't be using the board too much, I don't think, but I've been thinking this through, and there's one thing I need to put on the board, and that is that people have been mothering since the beginning of time, and whatever we learn today about culture or theology, we're going to just throw that out if it doesn't work for us, if that makes sense, because some of the things we're going to hear today feel really crazy. So we have a very steady line here. People have been mothering throughout time. People have been raising children, making them and bringing them to an age where they can sexually reproduce, and that has been considered successful motherhood. So I'll say that again, right? For a lot of scientists, psychologists, doctors, the bottom line of successful mothering is that your offspring gets to reproductive age. So any mother in here who feels, or parent who feels like you're a failure, if your kid made it to adulthood, you're good, right? You've succeeded, right? So there's this sort of basic line. People have been having babies, raising babies, and bringing them to sexual maturity since the beginning of time. And what's happened now, right, is that culture throughout history has put all kinds of ideas, right, on what mothering should be, and then theology and the church has added even more, right? So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to kind of stay up here a little bit, dip down in here, but I want you to reassure you that all the ideas that we hear today should not affect you too much. Let me start with that. And the only other thing I want to say is this is a very binary conversation, because all throughout history, it's been basically cis females having babies. But we know today that that doesn't have to necessarily be the case, right? But I'm going to fall into like the binary language of like women, 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 female, 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 because that's just sort of how historically it's been. And I mean, the majority of people who are pregnant and have babies still are cis females. I will also say that I do also want to make the disclaimer that for women who can't have kids, this is a hard topic, right? So just take what you can, and obviously think about it as ideas rather than as maybe something about you, but I want to recognize that infertility is a very real thing, and it's actually very common as well. So I just want to name that as well. Okay, so I did all this research, and I spent way too many years thinking about this, and what I want to say to begin with is that the institution, and just recognize that word, the institution of motherhood has served Western civilization. Maternity has always historically been a tool for like male-defined goals. So for example, all throughout history, right, it's been the big male patriarchs have traded their daughters to have peace with other clans, other tribes, and I'm focusing mostly on European peoples, right? So northern hemisphere is where this kind of research is coming from. Female reproduction was a currency. Fertile young girls were very valuable to people because we were wanting to have bigger and bigger families and populate the world. Male success depended on the work of women's bodies, right? The more children a woman could have, right, the more farm workers, clan workers, friends, soldiers, allies a man could have, right? So fertile women were very important. We're going to get to this in a few minutes, but the United States very much, in my opinion and in my perspective, has been deeply dependent, especially upon white motherhood, especially during the Revolutionary War and within dominant white culture. White mothers have been anchors of families, but also of institutions in the New World. When you think about it, and I'm jumping ahead, but Europeans come over to the New World, and you don't have any cities. You don't have any 1,000-year-old citadels. You don't have any churches. You don't have any cathedrals. What do you have? You have the home and the mother and the kids and the family and the servants and the slaves. So the family and the mother becomes this kind of institution, right, in the New World as Europeans built up cities, right? And the other piece here, which is really hard to hear, especially today, right, that women who didn't want to have kids or couldn't have kids were actually considered unnatural, right, throughout history, that there's something wrong with you if you didn't want children, because the idea was that the truest, realest woman wanted and desired kids. And we know today that is not true, and we're going to get to that, right? So yeah, I just want to give us permission, those of us I have two boys, and they're at the age where I'm like, wow, you're stinky, right? They're 11 and 13, so they're at that age where you're like, wow, what happened, right? So I want to give us permission. I want to give myself permission to just remind myself that it is not always natural for me to want to hug and love. we're taught and encouraged to feel certain things, right? So I've been socialized to be gentle. I've been socialized to be patient. I've been socialized to not necessarily take on masculine roles like flying planes or building things, right? So it's very interesting that historically women were taught and expected to feel and act and do certain things for the sake of building up.
I'm Sheila. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, those characteristics are lifted up as the ones we're all supposed to seek. And then do women more naturally have them, and men then have to work harder to attain them?
That's a good, yeah. That is a good question. I don't know, actually. I really don't know like where the biological lines are for that, right? Or is it so just deeply ingrained in our socialization? I don't know. And have gentle, patient, nurturing men actually been punished for being that way, right?
You're talking about this in historic terms and from Western civilization, but I see it across the world. And, in places like India where I met with the women who were prostituted by their fathers, sold into prostitution by their fathers. I saw it in Palestine in the areas where families are multiplying as fast as humanly possible. And women in many, many parts of the world today are prevented from work outside the home. They are prevented from even walking outside the home. There are 12 classical patriarchies in the world today that where women have basically no rights outside the home.
Yeah, there is no question about it that across the world you still see lots and lots of this kind of, I'm going to just name it like exploitation, right, of women and girls, 100%, right? I just make the disclaimer because I haven't done a lot of research about that, but we see it. Right? We see it even in America. There are actually child brides, so it's a real big issue. Okay, so very good. So with that being said, 1976, a woman named Adrienne Rich, some of you might know her. She was a poet and an essayist. Wrote a book that pretty much bombshell. Hi, you want to come inside? Okay, hi. That like bombshelled the idea of what motherhood was. And Adrienne Rich is the founder of a modern conversation of mothering, and her biggest thing is that mothering is an experience. It is not an institution. And she herself had 3 kids and felt very trapped by the expectations of motherhood on her. So she begins writing about her experiences, and they weren't pretty, right? Her experiences, basically, she claimed that motherhood is not a natural desire of all women. So she raised her kids, had a decent family life, had her typical struggles, but she was like, I had to learn how to love these children. It did not come naturally to me, right? Not all women can become mothers. Not all women want to become mothers. And women and mothers are 2 different groups of people, right? Not every woman is a mother. Right? And now we can say not every mother actually is even a woman. So this notion that women and mothers are 2 different groups of people doesn't mean there's not overlap, but she really wanted the world to see her as a woman and not just as a mother, right? So this is what's really interesting, and this conversation's going on in really interesting ways today that we can talk about someday, but really, really interesting. And so her point, right, was that societies have prioritized women as mothers, which is what we've been talking about, rather than recognizing them for just women or people who have all kinds of gifts. So, for example, experiences of mothering, and this is also then something that any gender can do, right? Anybody who can feed a child, who consistently feeds a child, consistently nurtures a child, consistently helps a child survive is a mother. Anybody who can train a child is a mother. But what Rich really focused on was the transformation of women's lives once they had kids. And this is really where modern motherhood conversation happens today, right? A woman who has a kid, right? She's got transformation of finances. She's got transformation of her career trajectory. She's got transformation of her body, which I blame my kids for my bodily problems all the time, even if it wasn't their fault, right? Transformation of your mind and emotions, transformation of your ambitions, because all of a sudden, it's not just you anymore, is it? Right? You got somebody who needs you to survive. Transformation of status in the workplace. So her book, where it really was the bombshell, was the way she described how she got really angry at her kids, how she felt ambivalent about being a mother, right? How she felt exhausted and discontented. And all throughout history, women have been trained to what? Not feel any of these things about their kids. Right? So it was very shocking for Adrienne Rich to kind of write this book about motherhood. And then we continue on. Mothers mother from all different identities and perspectives and places. They mother as lesbians. They mother as being in jail, right? They mother as being older women. They mother as being as younger women. I had my second kid, I was 39. That is a way different experience than a girl who had a kid when she's 18. Right? Way different experience. We mother from our religion as well, right? I'm not just a neutral mother. I'm a Christian mother. How is that different than a Jewish mother? I'm a white mother, right? We all know that's very different than being a black mother in America. So we have all these different ways of seeing women who mother, right? They're addicts. They were Nazis, right? Very, very interesting to think about the way women have brought themselves into mothering. So modern mothering conversations are revolving a lot around this. And I want to just point this out to you because what I did basically was start approaching the Christian tradition from some of these questions, right? Was there space in the Christian tradition for female ambivalence anywhere? Is there space in the Christian tradition for any other kinds of mothering? Which there is, which we can have a whole conversation about. So I was basically asking, what has the Christian tradition even said about it? And then what's been women's experiences within the Christian tradition? So we're going to kind of toggle back and forth between these. And there's 5 themes, and we'll kind of stop after each theme, and I'll go through them fairly quickly. But we can get lost in the details here, and I'm not even sure why. Anyway, okay. So 5 themes. The first theme is the theology of maternal detachment. Okay, and we'll start talking about that. The second theme focuses on the female body and what the Christian tradition has said about the female procreating body. The third theme really focuses on the medieval period and the way Mary has risen up as like the mother who protects us all. The fourth theme looks at regular mothers doing their best in the Christian tradition. And the fifth theme, which frankly was most eye-opening for me personally doing this research, is the way white supremacy and let me just say this, white culture in America depended, and especially Christian culture, depended upon the white mother, right? So we'll talk a little bit about all of these, and we'll take a kind of a little break between each one and see what you all think about them. So the very first one is the theology of maternal detachment. And what we know today, I should have prefaced this with what we know today, is that every person, every single human being, in order to be a healthy human being, needs some kind of attachment figure. It could be your mom, it could be your dad, it could be your grandma, it could be a teacher, it could be anybody, right? But the idea of attachment, that someone is going to be there consistently for you and protect you and train you and take care of you and feed you, is absolutely vital for all of our psyches, right? So what's really shocking is that in the early church theology did not believe that this maternal attachment was important. Now, I say that, but remember, mothers have been mothering all throughout, right? So we have all kinds of examples of the way mothers were attached to their children and fought for their children in the early church. But the theology, the people writing about God and mothers and families, were not excited about this kind of attachment bond. And the bottom line is, they weren't excited about it for two reasons. Number one, you shouldn't have been having sex in the first place, right? Because virginity was the highest value. And number two, if you are attached to a child, who are you then not attached to? Your God, right? If you're so focused on taking care of someone, you're not able to glorify God, right? So those are the basic foundations of thinking about the early theology of maternal detachment in our church. And I think I might skip some of these, but the other sort of piece behind, well, I'll get to that. So the first one, right, is the ancient value of virginity, right? So the idea is that you were supposed to be a virgin. And now here's where it gets really interesting, right? You weren't supposed to be having sex in the first place, but some very rich women in the Roman world, especially Paula and Melania are two examples, took advantage of that. They had children, and they said, well, Christianity is giving me a chance to have a second virginity, and I am going to go lead and found a monastic community in the desert. Goodbye, children. And this is what happened, right? They literally left their children with family members, very famous women, so they were kind of able to do that, leave their children with uncles, cousins, family members, and went into the eastern part of the Roman Empire, which was desert, and founded all-female monastic communities. So this notion of virginity in the early church is really interesting. On the one hand, if you had babies, which were a cultural value, but the Christians devalued that, right? But if you were a virgin, you were able to join these all-female communities. And we see many, many, many young Roman women joined these female communities. And the thought is they probably wanted to avoid childbirth, right? They didn't want to get married. They didn't have the opportunity to get married. So this idea of virginity has kind of an ambiguous role for women, right? On the one hand, it's shaming, and on the other hand, it gave a lot of early Roman women the chance to not get hooked into motherhood, right? So, and Paul and Melania left their children to do that. So I want to just make a really big point of that there's some ambiguity there, right, around that. Women took the opportunity to use Christian theology to follow their spiritual ambitions, right? So Paul and Melania became very, very famous Christian women. And now this is where it gets even more fun, right? Because they were so famous, all the people who were going to go be in the resurrection, we were all going to become male. So Paula and Melania and other female leaders of the early church were actually considered males. They were spiritual, what were they called? They were called female men of God. And they actually meant men, right? So in the early church fathers, people like Origen, and I love Origen, we should do a conversation about him someday. He actually believed that once we got resurrected, we would be stripped of all physical features and become spheres, because the perfect image was a circle and a sphere. And when we all die, we are going to become spheres who float around God in eternal peace, which I personally am growing. That's growing on me, right? I like that idea of becoming a sphere and bubbling around God for eternity, right? But he believed that, and he believed basically that everybody would strip, females especially, would strip or transform their female features and become male. So the women who detached from their children were already displaying male features of the resurrection. Do you see the logic here, right? That we were all going to become male, and when you detach from your kids, you're already moving into that resurrected male space, right? And so this is why I warned you all, because this just makes me mad, people. It makes me mad, but it goes back to, the Christians didn't make this up. This goes back to ancient Greek philosophy. Aristotle believed basically that females were deformed males, men were cold and hard and tightly woven. Women were loose and warm and spongy, right? And so when you had a female baby, it didn't get warmed up enough in you somehow, and so she is a deformed male. So the Christians are following this sort of ancient philosophy and physiology of trying to figure out what the female was. All right, why they had to do that, I don't know, right? But Christianity is working with this kind of notion, this binary, this mono notion that the real human being is a male, and then females are the deformed male. So ladies, just FYI, you're all deformed, okay? So this is the second sort of piece of this theology of maternal detachment, right? And then you have this notion in the early church, which I think is hilarious, that children are narcissists. So once again, if you are a mother trying to help a child survive, focusing your devotion and your love on a narcissistic child, you are not following God and glorifying God in the way that God deserves, right? And so they distracted their parents from devoting their full attention to God. So a very famous example that a lot of you might know are the famous martyrs Perpetua and Felicity. And in this account, Perpetua and Felicity join a small group of Christians to be executed by the Romans in a lion's den as Christians. So the Christians are being persecuted. This is the era of persecution. Christians are being rounded up and being persecuted. They are going to be killed by the lions in the arena. And Perpetua and Felicity were both pregnant. Perpetua had just had a child, a baby, and Felicity wanted to have an early, she got induced so that she would have her baby before she gets killed. Perpetua's dad begs her to get out of jail. Tell the Romans you're not a Christian. We know you're a Christian. Get out of jail for the sake of your son. And she's like, nope, I'm giving my son up and I'm going to die for the Lord. Which is, so we have these Perpetua supposedly wrote her own biography. I don't know if that's true, but the editors of her account really lift this up. And she gave up her baby to be killed for the Lord. Right? So it's just a perfect story of what Christians valued or what it meant to be devoted to God. Right? The ultimate sign of devotion to God was to give up your child. Right? So it's a really interesting exhibit A of the theology of maternal detachment. And before we take a little bit of a break for you to react to all this, it's basically what I mentioned before, right? This notion of detachment, were these women victims or beneficiaries, right? Perpetua honestly believed that she was being the best Christian she can be, right? Paula and Melania actually had a whole new career, right? Basically as these very, very famous leaders in the church, right? So it's this sense that like they were able to pursue their own Christian faith. We have no idea what these women thought, by the way. We only have accounts by men who praise them. So we have no idea if Perpetua and Melania really missed their children. It seems like, not Perpetua, Paula. It seems like Paula struggled a lot. One of her daughters came with her and then had like anorexia and like died early, and Paula was very, very upset about it. And Jerome, who wrote about her, was angry that Paula was upset that her child died, right? So there's this sense that like we don't know what these women were thinking necessarily when it comes to that kind of things. And even with Perpetua, she's a young mother. We have no idea really if they regretted it or if they felt like this was a chance for them to get out of motherhood. So that's theme number 1. Does anybody want to say anything or ask anything? Yes, Sheila.
I know you're sharing historical things with us, but bringing it into the now, it seems like we have a lot of desert mothers now.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is basically still the really a big conversation in like modern motherhood theory, right? Which is this notion of in how far do kids need the biological connection, right? And in how far, what do women owe their biological kids? Like you're thinking of like career women, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
It's a gamut of what
Yeah. Yeah. There's no question that modern life has freed women up to follow their ambitions, right? And so it is actually a big conversation about what women owe any kid that comes into your life, or what do men owe, right? But we haven't asked men that question. We've asked the women the question, right? So it's a good observation, right? That women today definitely are following their own ambitions, even if we could say that maybe with sexism in the workplace, there's still access issues, right? Or equality issues. But yeah, you're right about that. There was no other option for women in the early church. You were going to enter into the institution of motherhood, and you'd probably die in childbirth.
I was also
right?
thinking about people who we look at now in the present life of our church communities as our not desert father anymore, like desert parent. In the same way.
No, go ahead. You want to say more? I'm sorry. No, you're right. I mean, right. That's right. There's a lot of women today who are spiritual leaders. Yes, that's exactly right. And Paulette and Melania were also very important spiritual leaders. I don't want to pretend that they don't count, right? That they were absolute important spiritual leaders. Did you want to say something?
It just sounds like you're another developing religion here, when you're talking about the philosophy, Aristotle, the role of women. I mean, just going back to the creation story, and I fully believe women should be able to do whatever they want to, but it's like supposedly the Old Testament says God created them male and female, and that, they should go be fruitful and multiply. So your comments on why did this virginity become so important, and why did the maleness become so important? So then it sounds like they're just kind of developing their own religion about this.
Yeah, I think that's a good question about the influence of ancient Greek philosophy on our faith, right? It's still pretty deeply ingrained, right? And if you think about, we have a creation story that pushes against ancient Greek understandings of the male as the standard human being. We have that. And yet, we have not lived that out, right? That's a really good point.
So that's right. So that's my question. Is there a distinction you're making between Western and Eastern? Aren't these mysteries? What's going on with detachment? What's the motive of I know that's a big question, but I mean, we're not dealing with a universal in the strict sense of principles, so what and how does detachment relate to the other themes? I mean, what's going on? Why not just a mystery?
You mean what's going on with the concept of detaching from people?
I mean, what force is at play, or what self-determination attempt is?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I honestly, I have to probably think about that a little bit more, but if I think back on my research, these early church fathers were working really, really hard to form a community that wasn't patrilineal in the Roman society, right? And so you have these large patrilineal clans in Roman society that included everybody in the household: cousins, slaves, servants, farmers, everybody around a clan. And I feel like to give them some credit, these church fathers were trying to forge a community around God, right? So you gotta kind of break down some of these family connections to forge a community focused on God. They were also fighting against, right, these multiple deities, right? These house deities where families would have little deities in their house, right? And they would be worshiping not only that, but they'd also go worship ancestors. Every year, the death of an ancestor, they'd be going to a grave to have a picnic there, right? So there's a sense that these church fathers are like, no, God is your number one priority. So I think that is what feeds into some of this kind of detachment, right? And again, like Roman mothers were expected to display deep attachment to their kids to show that my kid is going to be good enough to be like a senator, right? Does that kind of approach it? So, I mean, there's probably a lot of different reasons and theories for that, but that's how I would name that based on that. Okay, so theme number two, and I won't talk as much about this, because you probably, well, it's, okay. So, theme number 2 is the female body and Eve's sin. And all of you can probably name where this is going to go, right? But fun fact, my fun fact is that the human female egg was first seen in 1827. 1827. That is less than 200 years ago that scientists realized that women had an egg. Before that, people suspected that women contributed something to childbirth, and this is where I get a little bit graphic with the biology here, right? But basically, the notion was that the male sperm carried the whole human being. The male, like when people make jokes about like you're baking a child, that's what people believed, right? The uterus was a warm, juicy place that baked a child, right? And so there's all kinds of, like still today, we kind of have this kind of imagery, right? So just to kind of keep that in perspective, right? That what we know about female reproduction is pretty new, actually, right? And that second thing to remember is that the pain in childbirth was still seen as a curse of Eve. It's clear in the Bible. I had a student about 10 years ago. She was in her 50s, and she said when she had her first child in the early 60s, or no, I guess, yeah, I know she was, I don't know when she had her kid, but she told me that when she had her first baby, the nurse would not give her painkillers to remind her of the pain of Eve. This was in Minnesota, and I guess her kid right now is probably in his 40s, right? So maybe she was in her 60s. She was an older woman, not older, but she was a senior student. So just to remember that, right? That the pain, and that's why I put down, like, up until 60 years ago at least. Has anyone else knows a family member, a grandma or a mom who had that experience? Right? So we're talking up until modern times, the pain of having a child had a theological, metaphysical dimension to it, right? It wasn't just regular pain. It was supposed to mean something to you and to remind the woman what Eve did to all of us, right? So lots of themes in Christianity about what Eve did to us, which just really kind of breaks my heart. So I'm going to keep going through this a little bit faster, right? But basically, women's reproductive and sexual organs were considered shameful. I think there's still some of that today. Christians loved the Greek myth of Pandora, right? That Eve was the Christian Pandora. Open up the box and all the evils come out in the world, right? And we can get into this. I'll just say the sentence and you take what you want. The Christian fathers worked on different theories then of how Jesus got into Mary's uterus, right? And this is a picture of the Würzburg Cathedral where God actually shoots Jesus into her ear. And this is the baby Jesus here sliding down a little water slide into her ear. Because this way she remained intact. She's a virgin. It's the ear, right? And it worked out really nicely for the Christians. Why? Because when you hear the preached word, God's Spirit, you hear it through your ears. And these aren't sexual, right? So there's images like this all over it, which is adorable, right? Like, look at this little guy. He's just going right down. He's already made, right? So it's hysterical, right? It's adorable. Except then you remember that, oh, that's because women's bodies were shameful, right? And the actual way this happens is a shame. So very interesting kind of ambivalence and just pure negativity about the female body. Now, as I say that, in the Christian tradition, we also have maternal generosity. And anybody who goes to any European museum is going to see the Madonna and Child and the bare breast because Mary feeds the world. Mary's nourishing milk feeds the world, right? And she is the mother of the Savior. Right? And so someone like Julian of Norwich, who I love, medieval woman thinker, talks about the blood of Christ as maternal blood. Jesus' sacrifice and blood on the cross is not the blood of a warrior or a soldier or a victim, but is the blood of a female giving birth, a female menstruating, right? So thinking about blood in terms of generative female blood, right? Rather than this kind of sacrificial victim soldier blood. So there's this really crazy like schizophrenia about the maternal body in the Christian faith. And this was what I was talking about, the egg. There's really no egg. And you have this little human being in the sperm, right? 17th century scientists were like trying to illustrate, right, what that's about, right? Where does the human come from, right? It's adorable. Like, I mean, it's not like they were seriously trying. And like, I don't want to laugh at them. Like, I want to give them credit, right? But what's really interesting is there was this big fight in the 17th century about whether women actually had eggs, right? And Jonathan Edwards, you all know Jonathan Edwards is a famous theologian, landed on the side of women have eggs. Go Jonathan Edwards. He also told all of us that we were hanging like spiders over God's eternal flame, right? And that we're all going to hell, but he took the side of the female egg, right? So this is where it's so fascinating. And what's fascinating to me about Jonathan Edwards is that what theologian or church leader today, except for the abortion issue, is involved in female reproductive health? Or, I mean, do we have any theology today of a famous preacher talking about women's bodies? I don't know. I mean, maybe the abortion debate is where that landed, but I think it's hysterical that Jonathan Edwards actually wanted to like get involved in like the scientific conversation, right? So very, very schizophrenic attitudes towards the female body. And I'm going to say a little bit more about Mary, but let me stop there. This was theme number 2. We're going to go to theme number 3. Does anyone want to make a quick comment about the maternal body? Sheila, go for it. You would disappoint me if you didn't.
Well, I'm Sheila, and I almost regret coming here because I had a 38-hour labor of tremendous pain, and I never knew that was because, well, compared to other women, I was really, really sinful, and it never occurred to me till today. It's just a new angle on that pain.
No, it is, right? It's a terrible angle on the pain, actually. You were not more sinful. You're just a better representative of Eve than the rest of us. That's what it comes down to. Right? I mean, imagine that, though. I mean, it's hard to think that young girls or, young women having babies were kind of told that. So that's the female body. Let's go a little bit further now on the vulnerable. This is a theme that I absolutely love, and this is where we talk a lot about Mary. So we liberal Protestants may not connect quite to this the same way that other people would, but basically, along with the rise of Mary, the rise of Mary parallels the rise of the importance of mothers in early European families. So I'm talking 8th century, 9th century, 10th century European families, southern France, Spain, into France, southern Germany, Switzerland, Italy. These places, you see mothers becoming very, very important. You see people starting to trace the children's lineage along the mother's line. And you see mothers also taking very, very powerful positions as advisors to their sons who were becoming like little fiefs and little kings and little lords. The mother was behind lots and lots of these sons. So you see sort of the political, cultural rise of the importance of the mother. And this is where, along with the rise of the mother, you have the rise of Mary. So you have an early European theology. Mary is the Queen of Heaven. So I feel like so many of us in Reformation traditions think about Mary as like a young girl, teenage pregnant girl, victim of circumstances, kind of thing, who like made it through. But the early Europeans saw Mary as, she's the fourth person of the Trinity, right? There's even pictures, again, if anyone's been to European museums, you got God the King, the dove, and the Son crowning Mary, the coronation of Mary. It's a huge theme, right? So you have Mary rising, and one sort of theme is that the Germanic tribes, the Alemannish tribes, actually gave their women more freedom than the Roman women. Roman women were expected to stay behind closed walls. Germanic women were on the field tending their wounded husbands, right? So like Tacitus, the guy who wrote about Germanic tribes, which may be not all correct, was like, ew, these German women are like attending their like male soldiers, like they are so barbaric. Our women stay behind closed walls, right? But there's the sense here here that these early European women had more freedoms. They were asked to do more things, and they rose to power in a different kind of way than Romans were doing. They also were administrators of large, large tracts of land. So super, super interesting. Like Charles the Bald, very famous, was known as the son of Judith. So with the rise of mothers, you have the rise of Mary, right? And I won't go too much into that. You can read all this if you want. But basically, these powerful mothers befriended the fledgling, powerful institution of the church. Women continued from the early church to flock to all-female Christian communities. So now we have women who are leading all-female medieval communities like the Bedouins, while they were also businesswomen, right? They sold silk, they made cloth, they traded while they were running and living in these convents, right? So what I want to plant in your head is that these all-female communities in the Christian church were not necessarily all bad, the way Martin Luther portrayed them, right? Women found a way to have protection in the church, not only of themselves, but of their children. We have archaeological evidence that women and children, their biological children, lived in all-female communities and convents, right? So women brought their kids to live in these Christian institutions, which I think is really, really fascinating, actually. So you start seeing Mary moving from being a queen of heaven to a mother. And you have this notion that her breasts are consolation. She feeds the world. We have these pictures of this intimacy now, right, of mother and child intimacy. We see her kind, affectionate gaze. And people like Anselm, very, very famous Archbishop of Canterbury, would write, "Oh, Mary, my mother, please protect me. Plead with your son to save me." Right? Be my intercessor, protect me. So then you have all these different kinds of statues of Mary as a protector. Why? Because around the turn of the millennium in the thousands, right, Jesus coming as a second time was scary, people. Right? He came first time on earth to help you and save you, and if you couldn't figure that out by the second coming, you're out, man, right? So the idea of Jesus coming again was very, very scary to Christians. And so they started praying to Mary. Mary, you're the mother. You have influence over your son. You are a mother. You know what it's like to have a vulnerable child. Please protect us. So you have all these are all people being protected. I love this image, right? Like Mary's protecting everybody from the wrath of God. Right? So you have Mary's rise as a mother. And you have all these little images, the Schutzmantel Madonna, it's called in German, the protective cloak, the Madonna of the protective cloak, right? And we're all under there, which is very counterintuitive for Reformation traditions, right? We're taught that you could pray to Jesus and you don't have to be afraid of Jesus. But medieval Christians were terrified of Jesus, right? Because he was coming as a judge, right? So Mary's body, I talked about this, Eucharistic body. This is super interesting theme in art. He's holding his wound. She's holding her breast to nourish people. And we have even, now this, just brace yourselves. Bernard of Clairvaux is one example of very important male leaders who claimed their wisdom through Mary's milk. He drank Mary's milk and became very, very wise. And this is what qualified him to become a leader of the Benedictine order, right? And you're like, did someone think that was okay to paint? Yeah, right? You're like, and so but the point, right? The point is that despite all this kind of negativity around the maternal body and the sin of Eve, you have with the rise of Mary, Christians being like, we are attached to you. Your milk feeds us. Your milk trains us. Your body feeds us. Your body protects us. It's like a classic understanding of what attachment is, right? So super, super interesting that Mary becomes that kind of maternal figure. And then I'm very sad to say that actually Luther comes along. And what does Luther say? Luther says, no woman should be in a convent. Nobody wants to be in a convent, ladies. He didn't ask them, right? He asked some ladies, right? Catalina, his wife, maybe didn't want to be in a convent, but those convents were working for women, right? They lived together. They did not have to become mothers, because don't forget, what I should have put a bottom line down here, right, is that women were having babies and dying in childbirth all the time, right? So Luther comes and says the best place for a woman to be is where? In the household with kids. Right? So Luther really domesticates Mary, but also gives a new Christian vision for where women are supposed to be. Now, I am going to move ahead, and we're going to move to the next theme, but are there any quick comments about the attachment to Mary?
When does she become the mother of God?
When did she become the mother of God? Well, actually, the ancient church named her Theotokos, mother of God. So from the 2nd century on, maybe, but not with this sense of like, she is here for sinners, and that she could influence her son. That's, to me, as far as I know, a medieval development where she's the mother who influences her son. Yeah, that's a good question about Theotokos, actually.
I was wondering if you can say a few words about how the Christian religion as it began seemed to be one that was completely focused on a male-dominated God, to the exclusion of any goddess worship, which had been quite common, and sort of Mary's rise as being a replacement or an initiation of goddess worship within Christianity. Yeah. And then just a word or two about the Protestant suppression of that.
Yeah, that's a really big question, really big theme. But basically, this is my take on it, right? Mary maybe rose, but she never became a goddess, because goddesses are unpredictable, they're powerful, and their sexuality is free. And Mary was never that. She rose as a virgin and as a mother. And those two things don't go together, but we hold them together in the Christian faith. Right? So I feel like Mary is a very contained female figure in the Christian religion in ways that other goddesses have not been. And that, I mean, I would stop there for now because I haven't done a ton of research, but that's my take on reading about, because even the Europeans had goddesses. Right, so it's not just an ancient thing, really. But I mourn the loss of goddess in our Western spirituality. But that's a really, really good question. And then your second question I forgot was a few words on. Yeah, so I mean, this really, I don't want to pin this on Luther, but it kind of comes down to that. Right, where he really believed in marriage and that women would find fulfillment in being part of the household, having children. He saw that as freeing for women. What he didn't see is that these kinds of Christian institutions of all-female convents freed women from the dangers of childbirth. He did not see that. Right? So I think like Protestantism has had a very like domesticated sense of the female, in my opinion. Right? And we're going to get to that now when we look at basically women in America. I'm going to skip over the fourth theme because this is a little more about women that I researched these are women, Duoda and Dorothy Lee and Elizabeth Jocelyn, we can talk about another time. These are women who wrote about their experiences as Christian mothers. So Duoda was in the 8th century, and her 2 sons got sold to the king because her husband was rebelling against the king, and they lost. And so she had to give her sons away to the king's service. Never saw them again. And she just writes about how they should be Christian people. She basically is like, I can't be with you to train you, but basically here's a way to be a Christian man. And the way to be a Christian man is to be kind and gentle and just within this very masculine society. And Elizabeth Jocelyn also wrote a legacy to her daughter before she died in and she knew she was going to die in childbirth. She thought she was, so she wrote to her child. And those are actually very interesting, and they're really signs of like maternal courage. So we won't talk too much about that because I would like to skip over to looking at American mothers now, because we only have a few minutes left. So the reason I jump over that is because that kind of delves back into history, and there's this sort of historical red line from Luther as a Protestant, Calvin domesticating Mary, frankly excising Mary out of the Trinity, which is what Luther does. Luther says, stop praying to Mary, stop praying to Martha, stop praying to St. Anne, even though he did. Right? Stop praying to these people. You're going to pray straight to Jesus. Right? Fine. Okay, fine. Nice, simple faith. Wait, we get it. Right? But this Reformation comes now as a red line into America. And it was what I talked about before, where you really have white Protestant motherhood as the institution in a very, very wild land. Right? And then you also have, though, occurring in America, on American soil, are in African women who are enslaved, who also were mothers, right? So this is where, in my opinion, the notion of white American motherhood is very complicated. And I can't go through it all right now, but it is definitely worth way more research by Christians for Christians so that we can understand the way white Protestant mothers have both been helpful in building up American culture, but we've also been part of the problem. And I really kind of hate to say it that way, but it's true, actually. White supremacy, maybe you as a class have already talked about how colonial Christians really believed that it was God's will that Europeans take over America. Right? This is God's will. It's God's providence. We are the city on the hill. God wants us to do this. And one way that happens is through maternal sacrifice. God loves women